I'm KLewin, and today I'm going to speak about the factors that draw people to sacrifice. More specifically, the extent to which people go to sacrifice their ancestral roots and their heritage in order to succeed in America in this modern era. So we're going to start out defining a term that I'm going to be using throughout my presentation. The Oxford Dictionary describes sacrifice as an act of giving something up, value for the sake of something else regarded as more important or worthy. And this concept of sacrifice is integrated into the lives of many different ethnic groups and types of people all around the world who are ultimately in search of success in America and are willing to go to great extents to achieve this goal. Okay, so among the many different motivations that are shared throughout cultures, ethnic groups, and even mere individuals, social and economic success are two very significant factors that drive people to sacrifice their ancestral roots and heritage when they come to America. An example of sacrifice for social success is prominent in an essay by James Baldwin entitled A Letter to My Nephew, which was originally published in 1962 and featured in the stimulus packet. Baldwin recounts his own experiences with a racist justice system and the overwhelming prejudice in this country, along with his hopes for men of color like his nephew and their success in the United States. He brutally describes the harsh reality that young black men need to face in America and encourages them to ignore the prejudice and to solely look out for themselves and their corrupt society while they're facing it. In the letter, Baldwin writes, "Please try to remember what they believe, as well as what they do, and cause you to endure, not testify to your inferiority, but to their inhumanity and fear." Throughout the letter, Baldwin warns the next generation of young black men about their position in society, and he ultimately argues that although the circumstances are unfair, each individual knows their own intentions and knows what they want to gain out of being in America, and if sacrificing their voice will ultimately lead them to success, he believes and he argues that it is worth it in the long run to ignore the prejudice and mold into what society wants them to be, as difficult as that is. The concept of conforming to society is very common among people coming to America and abandoning their heritage, not only different races and ethnic groups in America, but also immigrants and individuals who feel out of place in this country. And people view this conforming as the only way to succeed and is a way that they think that they can ultimately avoid prejudice and oppression, although they are sacrificing something else. Although there are always immigrants coming and going to and from places all over the world, in this presentation I'm going to primarily focus on those coming to the United States from South and Central America. So regarding the statistics of immigrants, among people from ages 15 to 29 living in other countries, 56% of them risk themselves to come to America. So that 56% that's leaving their home country is risking all the sacrifices that I've spoken about and that I'm going to go into more detail about. Whereas 31% of the country's general youth population chooses to remain in their home country. And although they are remaining in their home country and they're not coming to America, so they're not facing the prejudice and oppression and unfair treatment here, they are still in their home country not getting the same opportunities, which I'm going to get to is one of the main reasons that people come here. In 2016, there were 43.7 million reported immigrants that came to the United States, increasing the possibilities of the negative effects of sacrifice becoming more profound. As for immigrants in America, the Frederick Post describes their main motivations for coming here as a way to find jobs and to send money back home to support and feed their families who aren't enduring the same conditions because they are staying there, without the same opportunities. So in this state of desperation, immigrants will leave their families, give up on their home countries, abandon their culture and heritage, and sacrifice their happiness in order to get these opportunities in hopes to ultimately succeed and provide a better life for their children. However, during that process, their heritage is fading away, and we don't know in how many generations they're not going to have any culture to look to. Besides the repetitive, smaller effects that people receive when sacrificing themselves to come to America, there are also many long-term effects which are setting many ethnic groups on the path to ultimately losing their heritage. In an article by Elijah Anderson for The Guardian, Anderson describes the brutal circumstances that Black people in America are under regarding being able to show their true selves in this society. He says, Black people everywhere take note and manage themselves in a largely white-dominated society, learning and sharing the peculiar rules of a white-dominated society, in which expressions of white racism are becoming increasingly explicit. Anderson also describes profound borders between Black and white people in America, forcing Black people to give up certain aspects of themselves, such as not being able to live where they want because they're forced into segregated communities, or having to attend certain schools in order to avoid prejudice in America. And this does not only oppress all people that identify as Black in America, but also limits their capabilities and forces them to conform to what society wants them to be, while they gradually stray further and further from their roots. So another case study is about an immigrant and woman married to a Black man in America, Alina Adams, who uses her own experiences to teach her kids how to deal with being biracial in a predominantly white society. So Alina grew up in the former Soviet Union and is a Jew who ended up marrying an African-American man now living in New York. And she's a mother of 3 biracial children, and describes the way she has taught her children to defend their heritage, and says, if speaking up will get you attacked, if speaking up will get you physically hurt, then no. I don't think there's anything to be won by standing up and saying, I am A, B, and C, and getting pummeled for it, which she said in an NPR interview regarding should people hide their heritage. And Adams is raising her children to ignore their roots instead of showing pride in their heritage, because she thinks that will result in better outcomes and ultimate success. However, it also results in a lack of heritage being instilled in them, and them not knowing, first of all, where their mother comes from the Soviet Union as a Jew, and where their father's roots are. So they're growing up trying to ignore these huge factors of themselves that made them into who they are, which is leading us closer to losing all heritage. After hearing all the different sacrifices being made by immigrants, members of different ethnic groups, and individuals themselves, we have to ask ourselves the question, is it worth the sacrifice? The U.S. Census Bureau has shown an uprising in minority groups and a projected distribution for the future, which brings some hopes for more diversity within the nation. However, there are still doubts about heritage living on. In an article for The Progressive by David Love, he argues that once society prioritizes the acceptance of diversity rather than discrimination, which he argued is where we're on the path to, as many different forms of protests and different things like feminism and inclusion and diversity are becoming more prominent in our country. He believes that minorities will be much less likely to abandon their roots and will begin to show more pride in them, having their surroundings doing the same. So if these priorities are rearranged, heritage can continue to be passed on through generations to come instead of being sacrificed in the journey to success. And acceptance is the first step that our nation can take on as a solution to this deep-rooted problem. However, if this implication is applied, racism would decrease, prejudice would decrease, and therefore ethnic groups would not be ashamed or disallowed to carry on their heritage, making us a much more diverse nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Casey, can you tell us how the stimulus materials inspired your original research?
Yes. So I started out, I knew this was a topic that I was interested in, and out of all the stimulus materials, this particular one, Letter to My Nephew by James Baldwin, stood out the most to me because it was more personal and more intimate than the other ones I felt, so I connected to that personally because I'm more interested in that than soul facts or stuff like that. So when I gravitated towards this one and I was trying to think about the themes among all of them, I felt like losing heritage was really prominent among most of them, which I didn't include in my research because I didn't think it was as related to my topic as these other sources that I chose. But one about natives losing their culture, and I also included that in my research, but just didn't include it in my presentation or essay. But I did research that, so the stimulus packet really helped me to expand on that small idea because it was only part of the essay that he wrote, where I expanded into focusing more on racism and integration of immigrants and how we're losing heritage.
Thank you. And what advice would you have for other researchers who are considering this topic?
I would say try to expand as much as you can because I kind of started in my original research. I wasn't really sure in what direction I wanted to go. So I started out thinking that I may start with the natives losing their heritage, but I think first of all find something that you're interested in. As I said, that original essay in the stimulus packet I was really interested in, so that helped me move on to something. And also, it's really prevalent in our nation and this generation today, so it was really interesting for me to learn about it and research. So I'd say just try to expand as much as you can and have as many sources as you can, because that also came into account regarding sources about statistics and then personal stories and the different tiers I found really helpful. So, yeah.